Okay, this coming Sunday, we are going to be singing a song in worship that is not so familiar to our worship group at First Congregational Church in St. John's, Michigan. And so we're going to just talk about it for a few minutes and introduce the song so that it's a little familiar in worship. It's a great song called All Are Welcome by Marty Haugen, who seems to compose a lot of music for within kind of the Catholic Church. Um, and so we're going to talk about this piece, All Are Welcome.
Yeah, in the beginning of the song, the beginning of each stanza, it begins with the words, "Let us build a house," and it's talking about the kingdom of God and the church and the worshiping community. And when you first hear those words, "Let us build a house," you might think of it like that's an agreement among us people that we're going to build a house together as a place of worship. But how I really hear this is it's about we're building a house together, of course, but with God and God's Spirit. And I'm reminded of that passage in Peter's writings where he says that, you are living stones who are being built into a spiritual house. And that's how I hear this part of the lyric. It's an invitation to collaborate with God in God's Spirit to build a house of worship and of prayer. It's a house that represents the presence of God's kingdom in the people of God.
Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad that we are talking about this because I think I remember singing this song back in high school, which was kind of a while ago. And I always heard the voice of those opening verses as we, the congregation, setting ourselves in a particular direction and saying, this is what we're about in the light of God. But with this in mind, I go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, where the personhood of God, as it were, says to one another, let us make man in our image.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is so interesting to hear simultaneously kind of both voices, to hear the voice of God designing the spiritual household of all creation.
Mm-hmm.
And also I still hear the congregation's voice saying, yes, we're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of reminds me of how, what the Psalms talk about is the whole of creation is a temple to worship of God. It's a household of God. And when we intentionally interact with that in a way that's in accord with God, we're being that house as God intends because we're part of that creation. Yeah. What else do you see in the song as you think about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, one stand out to me because of the refrain, which is the title. The refrain says, all are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome, repeatedly. And then the verses have specific examples of what makes up the all that is all welcome. So everything belongs. And one of the examples is the outcast and the stranger. Two seeming opposites, but they belong in God's kingdom. They are, as the verse attests to, they both bear the image of God's face, which might remind us of some Bible stories like the Good Samaritan, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Everyone and everything belongs. Tears and cries and laughter.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't usually think about those things in the same room, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
but they belong. They're all part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
They are part of what it means to be human, and we as humans are part of God's creation. So every part of our experience belongs.
I think of how, we're made in God's image, and even as variable as we are, and our experiences are variable as people, we're all still part of that image, and so we all belong as part of that image together, where there's a unity in that. And no matter how different we are and what our situation is and what we experience, that part of us just never goes away no matter what happens. We're made in God's image that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It seems to me it's really good to acknowledge these differences and also to acknowledge and commit to making room for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm really glad
In
you
the
brought
house that we build, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you? What else stands out to you?
Well, he says in the song, it says, God's children dare to seek, to dream God's reign anew. And I think about how we have one sense of what God's reign is like, but that's renewed over and over again in the Christ as we understand more and more about who Jesus is and what he wants and how he wants us to live. And I think back to Isaiah chapter 9, where he talks about God is going to reign through David's throne. And of course, that's a reference to the messianic throne where Christ reigns. And so to me, that's very exciting. It's the idea of, the kingdom of God is a future, present, and future reigning of God. And it's an emerging reign as the kingdom of God is fulfilled and manifest in us. So that's very exciting to me. I look forward to the sort of creativity of the church as we go forward and as we follow Christ wherever he leads us.
Absolutely.
What else do you see as you think about this for our Sunday worship?
Well, I think one of the things I'm going to tag on to your last comment is that when I think about God's children dreaming God's vision, and I think of the verses that we have from Paul in Ephesians about being basically kind of God's poem, with kind of some connections to being sort of God's dream, realized in you. And I think about the exchange. So if I'm God's dream or an expression of God's dream, then how do I stay in touch with really what that dream is? And I think about all the wonderful prayer practices and different ways of learning to listen and pay attention and align my heart, mind, and spirit with God's. It takes some time. It takes a little bit of work. There's a learning curve, but it's so very accessible, really, truly. And to me, that's very exciting.
Well, that echoes the title of the song, doesn't it? All are welcome. We all have a role in that. And I think about, Jesus says he comes to save, not to condemn. And Peter, he echoes that, saying that it's not God's desire that some be lost. It's God's desire that all be saved. And so we're all welcome to this kingdom. It's God's intent for us. Well, I'm looking forward to sharing this on Sunday as we sing this together.
Me too. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Rachel.
Let us build a house where love can dwell and all can safely live us build a house where prophets speak and words are strong and true, where all God's children dare to seek, to dream God's reign anew. Here the cross shall stand as witness and as symbol of God's grace. Here as one we claim the faith of Jesus. All are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place. Let us build a house where love is found in water, wine, and wheat. A banquet hall on holy ground, where peace and justice meet. Here the love of God through Jesus is revealed in time and space, as we share in Christ the feast that frees us. All are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place. Let us build a house where hands will reach beyond the wood and stone, to heal and strengthen, serve and teach, and live the word they know. Hear the outcast and the stranger, bear the image of God's face. Let us bring an end to fear and danger. All are welcome, all are welcome, all are welcome in this place. Let us build a house where all are named, their songs and visions heard, and loved and treasured, taught and claimed as work within the word. Built on tears and cries and laughter, prayers of faith and songs of praise. Let this house